Hello, thank you so much for joining me today. My name is Vale Keyser, and I have the pleasure of serving as the Director of Teaching and Learning in Lake Forest District 67. I am joined today by Denise Galatsianos, my literacy coach in the district, and we are really here today to present to you all of the work and thought that's gone into our comprehensive reading review this school year. So welcome, we're excited to have you here today. So when I walked into the district, there were really three big buckets as far as where to focus the work this year. One being our math implementation at the 6 through 8 level in middle school, as well as developing our instructional coaching program. And I would say by far the biggest piece has been our reading review for K through 8. So that's where we've been focusing most of our time and attention this year. So just very briefly to fill you in on what the background of this work has looked like. From last year, this process really started last year under the leadership of Jeff McHugh, our former Director of Teaching and Learning, now our Deputy Superintendent. They started really reviewing best practice and all of the research that was out there with reading instruction, just recognizing that there were some shifts in research and just understanding what that would look like in terms of what we needed to make sure was our teachers knew about and what would anchor this work ahead. As well as we have access to our ELA committee made up of teachers. And one of the things that they did last year too was really to examine the core beliefs to make sure that the research and the core beliefs really aligned with each other. From this year, as I walked in, we really went back and looked at how these standards and assessment play a critical role in instruction with students. So for example, all of this work, when we have students enter third grade per se, we ask that when they leave that grade level, that they are mastering a standard, not necessarily the resource in which we're teaching. So for example, we use units of study currently. We're not asking our students to say, you have mastered the units of study, rather the standard, the Common Core State Standard, which is what we are ultimately assessed on by the IAR exam. So we've looked at all those different things, and this is just the briefest background because there's been a lot of work that's gone into it, but that ultimately has led us to where we are now. And where we are now is we are in the process of a pilot that's about to start actually Tuesday, which is very, very exciting. All of this work ahead of the introducing a resource really informed us about that best practice and gave us another lens in which to look at these resources for our students. So we've had the opportunity to talk to lots of different stakeholder groups this year. We've been able to talk to various parents on committees, our staff, administration. And one of the questions that I've asked is just, what is our biggest hope for our kids? What's the outcome that we want to see at the end of the day here? And these are just a few samplings. You know, we want to make sure that our students are leaving as confident learners, that we're really meeting the needs of all levels of each and every child, that there's engagement, and that we have that strong foundation with those foundational skills. And really the reason for asking this question is just anchoring us that we all share the same goal. We all really want to see our students succeed, so that we're all going in that same direction. So when it comes to the research, one of the things that we have done is we've really taken a look at what is out there as far as the simple view of reading. And I'm going to ask Denise Galatsianos to just explain a little bit of how this has really driven our work as well.
So as we've gone through, we've been using two different models to help us make sure that we're taking a holistic look at what reading instruction and literacy instruction should look like across the grades, starting with our primary students, working up to our 8th grade. So the first one you may have heard of before, it's called the simple view of reading. And it's a math equation. So basically what it means is students need to be able to recognize words, meaning going all the way back to the alphabetic principle of knowing that sounds are represented by symbols. And when you bring those symbols together, they make words and words into sentences, and being able to read those words with different strategies, but then eventually that all words become what we would call sight words, that they're able to recognize them with automaticity. So you need to be able to, for lack of a better term, like know the code. But then also, I can know the code, but as a reader, I also need to have language comprehension, meaning I need to know what those words mean. And as you can see in this simple model, it's not an addition problem, it's a multiplication problem, because we really need both together. So if I multiply word recognition times language comprehension, Thus, I'm able to comprehend the text that I am reading. If one of those components is missing, the equation would be 0, therefore we wouldn't be able to successfully comprehend. So this is one view that we've used really to make sure that we're looking at the different components of instruction. And then one that goes a little bit deeper, it's very simple, but it's more of a top to bottom view, is also known as Scarsborough's rope. And so you can see it's very similar, but now what this rope is showing is that students learn these skills in isolation. So if you look at the bottom, you can see is the first half of the simple view is word recognition. So all of the different pieces that go from phonemic awareness or phonological awareness, where we're talking about if I say a word like pop, what's the first sound you hear? P. Or recognizing that like cake rhymes with bake. And then moving that into identifying different syllable types, moving into sound symbol relationships, and then ultimately, like I mentioned before, being able to read sight words, meaning that we can read words with automaticity. And so we learn those skills in isolation. The way your brain processes language is a little bit different when you throw in the orthographic mapping, meaning the symbol. But then at the same time, as I'm developing those skills, I'm also developing language comprehension. So that's the vocabulary, the literary language, being able to understand that there can be multiple meanings. And so the metaphor of the rope is showing like I learned these in isolation and then they get tightly wound together. And thus, as I cognitively process those, you can see where the rope becomes tight. Thus, that develops a skilled reader. So as Vail mentioned, when we're going through and looking at our research and conducting the pilot, we're really working to make sure that we're looking for all these components through our literacy instruction.
Thank you. So with all of the research, the standards assessment instruction work that we've done, we were then ready to think about what are those resources that are available to us. So back in, I believe it was November, we started with our initial research just about what resources are available. We did utilize EdReports as a base to identify how these programs were rated. We also brought in a representative group of teachers. So with them being on the ground floor, having them part of this process was really important for us. Not only teachers, but reading specialists. We had our instructional coaches, we had some LBSs, our special education teachers, so lots of representation. With that, we looked at the different resources available. We had criteria that were developed based on some of the input from our ELA committee, as well as being tied to the work with our research and our standards assessment and instruction. And then ultimately, back in December, we selected various resources for publisher presentations to come in. So our publishers came in, they were able to present to us. And one thing to note here is that we were very intentional about not having the publishers join us first for this initial look through the process. We were trying to make sure that we were being as objective as possible with the process. So once the publishers came in, we then were able to narrow it down to 3 different resources that we selected to pilot based on all of our criteria and all of our learning, what we wanted to see happen for kids. So we have chosen 3 different resources. And again, these all share very common pieces. So when we came up with the different points to talk about, you're going to see an overlap here, which is what we want for all of our students. But the first one that we chose to pilot this year is Amplify. There's CKLA for K through 5, and then the ELA for 6 through 8. And really the highlights here is that Amplify is a comprehensive resource, meaning that it does a nice job of balancing all of those things from the Scarborough's rope that you just saw. There's skills for the foundation piece, so making sure there's that nice word recognition already embedded, as well as knowledge building. So making sure that we're taking the time to build knowledge for our students. Amplify 6 through 8 is the other component of that, and that's also built on that science of reading, which is nicely established from the K through 5 lens, as well as assessments that are aligned to our standards to make sure that we're getting some really good information about how students are performing in alignment with the standards. And again, why are standards important? That goes back to, that's a piece that, from the accountability piece, when we look at something like IER, our Illinois School Report Card data is derived from that. So how are we measuring along the way instead of just learning about it that once a year on the IER? As well as there's this flexible pathway built in for our middle schoolers, recognizing we've got a little bit of flexibility there with what we do. Another one that we chose was Wonders, and the other component to that is Study Sync. They talk very nicely to each other. Again, you're going to notice that these ones talk about being comprehensive, that they've got all the components that we're looking for. Access to complex text for all of our learners, so making sure that we're providing that rigor for our students, that they're able to see grade level text passages all throughout. And then there is this really beautiful relationship between reading and writing. And I think one of the things that when we started off this year with the reading review is we talked a lot about reading. And through our research, through everything that we've learned this year, we know reading and writing go hand in hand, right? They are really related. So all of these programs are doing a nice job of that reciprocal relationship as well. StudySync, very similar. It's comprehensive. It has that instructional pathway that's very flexible for our teachers to make those instructional decisions. And then there are some collaborative writing and research projects. And then our third one that we are going to be piloting is called Wit and Wisdom, and that's a K-8 resource. Again, it focuses on that knowledge building component. There's this sense of inquiry embedded into instruction, so kids are really getting curious about their learning, and we're exploring. The standards that we talked about are integrated very nicely. And then the other piece is that there's this cooperative learning models that are integrated. So a lot of what we have talked about is reading and writing, but we also can't forget about that speaking and listening piece. One of the pieces that, surveying the staff and parents before is, what do we want for our students? We also want them to be good communicators, not just written form, but also out loud when we're talking, when we're articulating our responses. So all of these programs really overlap very beautifully with those different things. So from there, we chose our ones to pilot. When we came back from winter break, one of the things that we did is we laid out a very thorough plan for our staff so that they could really understand, why are we doing this? What are we doing? Who's involved? When is it happening? How are we going to make this happen? And an opportunity for some frequently asked questions. This is a living and breathing document that we're still using. We've been referencing it for the last 6 weeks, just to make sure that everybody has the information that they need to be successful with our pilot. So we started with, back in January, we identified very intentionally 3 different dates that we wanted to see our publishers involved ahead of it starting with the pilot. And the reason for that is we know that time can be an issue, as well as making sure that our teachers have the skills and knowledge necessary in order to feel more confident in implementing a pilot program. So we had 3 different dates identified ahead of the pilot starting next week. And the first one was just a publisher overview. So what we did is we broke up our staff into different groups. So if I am a teacher at Cherokee on first grade, one of us will be looking at Wonders, one of us will be looking at Wit and Wisdom, and one of us will be looking at Amplify. So everybody has been assigned a different resource. And really a big piece of that is we're looking at, how do we build capacity across our system? So if we were to have chosen to do the pilot with one school doing one resource, that would have gone well there. However, we wouldn't have had that piece across all of our schools. So on this publisher overview, we had our kind of cross-district groups come together to look at the resources. They were introduced. You're going to see right here the different groups that came together. They were really introduced to that resource from the publisher of, what's the why behind this resource? How is it good for kids? How does it align to the work that you've already done? And again, this is where I just need to applaud Denise Galatsianos. She's done an incredible job of helping support our teachers and our staff and just the publishers with communication, making sure that we are being very intentional about the time that we're spending with our publishers. So they were able to get a big picture there, and then this is when we also introduced an opportunity for feedback and for questions, because we all want to do our absolute best with something like a pilot. We want to make sure that learning doesn't stop. We want to make sure our kids are getting what they need. So the opportunity to really have this open dialogue with our teachers and access to publishers, to myself, to Denise, has been really important too.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about when we kind of got into all of the details as teachers. So we wanted to ensure, as we entered this pilot, that we were continuing to impact students' literacy growth. So we wanted to give you an example of what we did in order to select the units that we were going to pilot. So you can see over in the image that we have, this is a 3rd grade example. What we did for every grade K through 9 is we looked at our current curriculum calendar at what would the learning sequence be moving into the month of March. And we looked at what were the standards for reading, and not only reading, but also thinking about writing. And then keeping in mind that we know that we were moving into testing season after spring break. So we took that unit, and you can see for 3rd grade, it happened to be an informational text reading unit around animal research, but then also they were doing some informational text writing. And we went through each of the 3 resources and looked at what would be a good fit in terms of skill set at this time of year, but we also wanted to look at ensuring that we were covering the same genres for reading and writing. So when we were going through that, we identified a few different options. And then Vail had mentioned earlier today that back in the fall, we had different representatives come from every grade and every school. We collaborated with them and the ELA department at the middle school to ensure that we were identifying the units that would be best fit, because of course, when you're looking at 3 different resources, they're not all going to have 3 of the same modules or units, but we really worked to align those. And then we came to a consensus on making sure that we were choosing the best options to impact student growth. And so you can see in 3rd grade, we were able to look at a unit called Our Astronomy, where we were doing some formal writing in Amplify. Then in the green column is Wit and Wisdom. They're also going to be learning about the same content through outer space, but the big key was we wanted to make sure that they were going to be able to do some essay writing as well. And then finally, Wonders has 3 different genre studies, but we were able to identify a unit where there were 2 different genre studies where they were going to be able to do some informational essay writing as well. So we were able to do that for every grade, and we're really excited to get started next week.
And again, I think the intentionality was to make sure that this wasn't completely disruptive to what would be happening. You know, we're using this pilot as a guide for where we go next. So trying to make sure that it was not disruptive and that it was aligning with what things that we were already doing and helping inform us about our next step. So the other piece here is just a deep dive. Again, with our pilot, the biggest thing that we can ever offer for our staff to get comfortable with something is time. So this is actually happening tomorrow, weather dependent, right? Where we are coming together and having that 3rd touch point with the publishers, where they are going much deeper into the unit they'll be instructing and having that time to collaborate with their counterpart across the district and really look at what does this look like paced over this pilot. As you probably saw in my communication from the district, we start on Tuesday, we end right before spring break. So it is short, it's about 4 weeks long. So we wanted to make sure we offered that time to make sure that they were able to plan that out accordingly, have, again, more time and opportunity to talk with the publisher, but also with each other, because we have some very talented people in this district, just giving them that time to be able to ask questions and, you know, think through different problem solving and how that would look. So the pilot expectations that we laid out for this process are that we do have, it's an all hands on deck approach. Again, we are making such an important decision for kids that this really felt like the right way to go, that we're getting input and feedback from all of our staff. So every K through 4 teacher is implementing one of those resources, as well as our ELA teachers in 5 through 8. We are going to do kind of a stop, drop, and pilot. So what I mean by that is that we are looking at those reading skills, the writing, and foundational skills. So every teacher will really get to experience what those are like for the resource. Because again, at the end of this, really the hope is that we're going to make a recommendation to the Board of Education. And what we want to better understand is, what are the strengths of this resource for students? Where do you see some barriers or some challenges, possibly some things that we would need to supplement or to be thinking about for a support plan? And then just how are our students responding to this? So all of this will be some feedback that we're getting along the way. Other expectations, just that collaboration with their counterpart from across the district. Again, leaning into each other and understanding what is this looking like for you? How's it going? What are you noticing about students here? Problem solving, all of that good stuff. And then at the end of the pilot, what we're looking for is input from all of our staff on the resource that they pilot, as well as our current units of study. And we have a rubric that we've kind of tweaked for that piece. And then we also really value and care about our student voice. So we put together a small team to be thinking about what are some of those questions we could or should be thinking about asking our kids when it comes to what they're learning through this pilot. how they learn best when it comes to reading instruction. Their voice matters, and we certainly wanted to make sure that we took some time to include that here too. Given that it's such a short pilot, we wanted to make sure we were asking the right questions and just getting some feedback there. So a couple of other things just to note as far as things that we wanted to make sure our parent community were aware of is just this is a heavy lift, and it's a interesting time of year, just with it being February, with the weather, with report card season, conferences coming up, IR assessment. There's a lot going on, and I think we all feel that. And I just need to thank and appreciate our teachers. They have been so wonderful through this process. They've offered some really wonderful, thoughtful discussions and questions, and all of that is because they want to make sure that they are not interrupting 4 weeks of learning, but that this is a complement to what we're doing and that they're continuing to see that growth over this time. What we have reiterated to our staff too is that we're looking for progress, not perfection. We have some very skilled and talented people in these positions that really want to get it right. And what we need to make sure they know is that this is a glimpse. We're not going to get the whole, gist of the program. We're going to get just that 4-week snapshot. So please make sure you understand that no one is standing up here saying you must get it perfect. It's really about our learning. It's about student learning. It's about our staff learning. What are we noticing? Timing of the year, I already mentioned, just with all the things going on. And then one of the pieces that came out, I think it was last week, was the parent communication. We wanted to make sure that you as parents had more information about what this process looks like. I think that I've been a part of the strategic planning process this year, and something that has really been notable is just how can we make what we do on a daily basis or for big things like a reading review more visible. So that's been kind of some of that feedback coming into play of making teaching and learning as visible as possible for our parent community as well, to keep you in the loop. And then while all of this is going on, not that a pilot isn't enough, but we are being as thorough as we possibly can about this whole process. So one of the other things that we're doing simultaneously for research is that we're collaborating with other districts that have already implemented these resources. We have reached out to talk to different district administration, building administration, instructional coaches, and teachers. So we're currently setting all of that up. We will also be looking at the financials and what each of these resources, what the dollar amount would be going into, what this would look like if we were to go full implementation. We're thinking about our implementation plan. So that feedback from staff is going to be really important, again, to be thinking about. There are going to be some things that are really well done, and then there are going to be things that we're like, we need to have more of a robust plan in place for that. So that's where that's going to come in. We're also thinking about that professional learning piece. So it's not just going to come from the resource itself, but making sure that our teachers have access to the professional learning that they need in order to be really rich, solid reading teachers as well. And then master schedule, that will be something that we're looking at as well, to make sure that the minutes align and that we have in place the plan to best support the different resources that we have. Final thoughts. One of the pieces that we've talked about is just there really is not a magic wand here. So every resource we look at is going to have its strengths and its considerations. So that's really the reason why we're going through such a comprehensive plan for this whole process. We will make sure that as a part of this, with the feedback, that moving forward there is a really solid plan in place for our staff, because we need them to be successful. And when our teachers are successful and have the skills and knowledge that they need, they positively impact our kids. And what we've been looking at this process the whole time is we have an opportunity. We have such a huge opportunity ahead of us for our students, that at the end of this, we have 1,600 kids we're going to positively impact, and many, many more to come. So it's been a journey, but it's also been very meticulously thought out to make sure that we are doing it the right way and that we're getting the information that we need moving forward. So at that point, that was our presentation that we just wanted to share our plan with you. We appreciate you coming today, so thank you for taking the time to be with us.